I couldn't sleep that night. The conversation with Greg Thompson kept replaying in my head, and the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that something shady was happening. The HOA renting out parking spaces without informing residents? A policy change, hidden in a newsletter? And Thompson's smug, overconfident response? None of it added up. By morning, I had a plan. First, I needed proof that this so-called parking rental program wasn't just some legitimate initiative, but something more sinister. I had a feeling that Thompson wasn't funneling this money into HOA funds like he claimed. If he was profiting off these rentals personally, I had to catch him in the act. And for that, I needed help. I knocked on my neighbor Lawson's door again, and when he opened it, I didn't waste any time. I need to figure out what's going on with the HOA. Specifically, who's really making money off these rented parking spots? Lawson smirked. Knew you'd be back. You're not the first one to get screwed over by Thompson. That got my attention. What do you mean? Lawson leaned against the doorframe. You think this is the first time he's pulled something like this? A couple months back, people started getting random fines for things that weren't even in the HOA rules. Some guy got fined for having a non-compliant mailbox, whatever that means. Another woman had to fight a fee because they suddenly claimed her patio furniture violated aesthetic guidelines. I frowned. So he's been nickel-and-diming people. Exactly, Lawson said. And now he stepped it up with this parking thing. I'd bet money that cash isn't going to the HOA, it's going straight into Thompson's pocket. That was all I needed to hear. Do you know how I can prove it? Lawson grinned. You ever hear about Janet? She used to be on the HOA board. I shook my head. She quit a few months ago. Said she couldn't stand the corruption. If anyone has dirt on Thompson, it's her. I didn't waste a second. I got Janet's number from Lawson, called her up, and by noon, I was sitting in her living room, listening to what she had to say. You're not wrong about Thompson, she said, shaking her head. He's been skimming off the top for a while now. That's why I left the board. I couldn't stand being part of it. I leaned forward. How does he do it? Janet sighed. A few ways. Fines, mostly. He makes up random violations and pockets the money when people pay. And now, apparently, parking spaces. It's brilliant, really. Most people don't fight back because they assume the HOA has the legal right to do it. But they don't, I said. Not legally, no, Janet confirmed. The HOA isn't supposed to profit off things like parking. Any revenue is supposed to go back into the community. But Thompson? He's been keeping that cash for himself. That made my blood boil. Do you have proof? Janet hesitated. Not directly. I couldn't access financial records, and the board meetings were always vague about where the money was going. But I do know this. He's been renting out spots for way more than he lets on. You should find out how much he charged for yours. That was a good idea. If I could figure out exactly how much he was charging for my spot, I could compare it to any official HOA financial reports. If there was a discrepancy, I'd have my proof. But how could I find out the price? Then it hit me. I needed to talk to the person who was actually renting my space. So that evening, I staked out my parking spot, waiting for the BMW owner to show up. I didn't have to wait long. Around 7 p.m., a man in a suit walked toward the car. He looked like a businessman, polished, confident, and completely unaware that he was involved in something shady. I approached him before he could get in. Hey, excuse me. He turned, surprised. Yes? I forced a friendly smile. Sorry to bother you, but I was just wondering, how much are you paying for this spot? The man gave me a confused look. Why do you ask? Because this is actually my assigned spot, I said. The HOA reassigned it without telling me, and I'm trying to understand how this whole rental thing works. His eyebrows shot up. Wait, you're the original owner of this spot? I nodded. His expression shifted to something between guilt and irritation. I had no idea. I just assumed it was extra space available for lease. I wouldn't have taken it if I knew someone else was using it. I waved it off. Not your fault. But if you don't mind me asking, how much did you pay for it? He hesitated, then sighed. $200 a month. My jaw nearly hit the pavement. $200 a month? I took a step back, stunned. You're paying Thompson directly, right? Yeah, the man said. It seemed a little odd at first, but he told me it was part of a new program. I knew it. There was no way Thompson was reporting this income to the HOA. If he was renting out multiple spots at that price, he was making thousands off of residents without them even knowing. And now I had proof. Would you be willing to testify if I take this to the board? I asked. The man looked uncomfortable. I don't know. I don't want to get involved in HOA drama. I understood. Most people didn't want to deal with HOA nonsense. But I wasn't letting Thompson get away with this. That's fine, I said. Thanks for the info. It helps a lot. As I walked back to my condo, my mind was racing. I had enough to start exposing Thompson's scheme. The next step? Confronting him with the evidence, and watching him squirm. I knew something was wrong the moment I turned into my condo complex that evening. My parking spot, the one I had been using for years, the one clearly marked with my unit number, was occupied. But not by my car. Instead, a sleek black BMW sat there, engine off, completely unmoved by the fact that it was trespassing on my rightful space. At first, I thought maybe a guest had accidentally parked in the wrong spot. It happens sometimes. New visitors mistook assigned spots for open parking. No big deal, right? I pulled up next to the car, expecting to find someone sitting inside, but the driver's seat was empty. Frustrated, I let out a sigh and pulled into the visitor parking area, which was a good distance from my building. Hauling my groceries across the lot, I made a mental note to leave a polite note on the windshield later. But as I passed by, I noticed something odd. This wasn't just some random visitor's car. There was a parking permit on the dashboard. An HOA permit. Confused, I leaned in to get a better look. The permit number didn't match mine, but it was definitely official. And that's when it hit me, someone had assigned my parking spot to someone else. Now, I was irritated. I had paid my HOA dues, followed all the rules, and never had an issue before. How could they just give my spot away? Determined to get answers, I marched straight to my building, groceries forgotten. I fired off an email to the HOA, demanding an explanation, but knowing how slow they were, I wasn't expecting an immediate response. So instead I did the next best thing. I went straight to my neighbor, Mr. Lawson. Lawson had lived in the complex for over a decade. He knew everything about the HOA's inner workings and always had the latest gossip. If something shady was happening, he'd know. Lawson, I said, knocking on his door. Do you know anything about the car in my spot? His eyes narrowed slightly. BMW? I nodded. Yeah, I saw a guy parked there this morning. Looked like he knew exactly where he was going. Didn't hesitate or anything. That didn't sit right with me. You think the HOA assigned him my spot? Lawson crossed his arms. Wouldn't surprise me. They've been pulling some questionable stuff lately. People getting fines they shouldn't, new fees popping up for no reason. I'd check with the HOA president. That was all I needed to hear. I thanked Lawson and stoned back to my unit. If the HOA had done this without telling me, I wanted answers. Right now. I checked the HOA office hours. They were still open for another 30 minutes. Perfect. 15 minutes later, I was standing in front of the HOA office, knocking on the door. The person who opened it was none other than Greg Thompson, the HOA president. He was a middle-aged man with an overconfident smirk and a suspiciously expensive-looking watch. I had never liked him, and the feeling was mutual. Ah, he said, leaning against the doorway. What can I do for you? I crossed my arms. There's a car in my parking spot. A car that isn't mine. And I'd like to know why. Thompson's smirk didn't fade. If anything, it grew wider. Oh, that? It's been reassigned. My stomach dropped. Reassigned? What do you mean reassigned? That's my spot. It's always been my spot. Actually, he said, glancing at a clipboard in his hand, HOA policy allows for reallocation of parking spaces in certain circumstances. I scoffed. Since when? I never agreed to that. Thompson shrugged. It's in the revised bylaws. The board approved the changes last month. I clenched my jaw. And when were we supposed to be informed about this? Oh, we posted it in last month's newsletter, he said, waving a hand dismissively. A newsletter? No email? No personal notification? This wasn't some minor change. This was my property. So you're telling me, I said, struggling to keep my voice even, that my assigned spot was just given away without my knowledge? It's not just given away, he said smoothly. It's now leased. I blinked. Leased? Correct. We've introduced a parking rental program for non-residents. It's a great way to generate revenue for the HOA. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My spot, my legally assigned space, was being rented out for profit? I took a deep breath. And who authorized this? Thompson smirked again. The board did. And who's benefiting from this revenue? The HOA, of course. I didn't buy it. Something felt off. And how much are you charging for my spot? That information isn't available to residents, he said with a casual shrug. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about generating revenue for the community. This was about someone lining their own pockets. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Greg, are you personally profiting from this? His face barely twitched, but I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes. It was quick, so quick that most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. I knew I had hit a nerve. I suggest, he said, his smirk returning, that you take this up with the board at the next meeting. In the meantime, if you'd like to lease another parking space, I'd be happy to set you up with one for a reasonable fee. I almost laughed out loud. He had the audacity to steal my spot and then offer to sell me another one. Oh, this wasn't over. Not even close. As I walked away, my mind raced with possibilities. Something wasn't right. If the HOA was leasing spots, why wasn't this information public? And if the money was really going to the community, why all the secrecy? No, this wasn't just an innocent policy change. This was something deeper. Something corrupt. And I was going to find out exactly what was going on. I had everything I needed. Proof that Greg Thompson was renting out my parking spot for personal profit. The BMW owner's admission was the final piece of the puzzle, and now, it was time to confront the HOA. But I wasn't going in alone. Before I made any moves, I reached out to a few other residents who had been complaining about unfair HOA policies. Lawson was the first person I called, and after explaining what I had uncovered, he was more than ready to help. This is exactly the kind of crap I knew was happening, he said. We need to take him down. I also called Janet, the former board member. While she was hesitant to get directly involved, she agreed to back up my claims if necessary. By the time the next HOA board meeting rolled around, I had a small army of frustrated homeowners ready to challenge Thompson. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, and when I walked in, I spotted Greg Thompson sitting at the head of the table, looking as smug as ever. He clearly wasn't expecting a confrontation. Too bad for him. The moment the meeting opened for resident concerns, I stood up. I have a question for the board, I said, my voice steady but firm. Can you explain why my legally assigned parking spot was rented out without my permission? The room went silent. Several residents turned to look at me in surprise. Thompson didn't even flinch. As I explained previously, he said smoothly, the HOA has implemented a parking rental program to generate revenue for community improvements. Right, I said, crossing my arms. And how much revenue has been collected so far? Thompson hesitated for just a fraction of a second before answering. All financial records are available upon request, he said, dodging the question. Great, I said. I'd love to see them. Because according to one of the people renting a space, they're paying $200 a month directly to you. Funny how that wasn't mentioned in any of the budget reports. A few murmurs spread through the room. Thompson's jaw tightened. I don't discuss private financial matters in an open forum. I smirked. That's convenient. Before he could dismiss me, another resident, an older woman named Mrs. Patel, stood up. Actually, I'd like to know where all this extra money is going to, she said. Because our HOA fees went up last year, and I haven't seen any new improvements. Another resident chimed in. Yeah, my husband got fined last month for improper trash disposal, but the HOA refused to show us any evidence. Now we find out parking spots are being rented out for cash? What's really going on here? Thompson was losing control of the room, and he knew it. His confident expression hardened. I assure you, all HOA funds are managed appropriately. I wasn't done yet. Then prove it, I challenged. Provide financial records that show exactly where the money from these parking rentals is going. The room fell silent again. Thompson's eyes flickered with frustration. He looked at the other board members, but none of them rushed to his defense. The pressure was mounting. Finally, he sighed. I'll need time to compile the reports. I didn't trust him for a second. How long? A week, he said. I stared him down. Fine. But if those numbers don't add up, we'll take this beyond the HOA board. Thompson didn't respond. He just moved on to the next agenda item, pretending like I hadn't just exposed a massive problem in his leadership. As the meeting wrapped up, several residents approached me. If you need help pushing back against the HOA, count me in, one man said. Others nodded in agreement. Lawson clapped me on the back. You just made yourself a lot of enemies on the board, he said with a chuckle. I don't care, I said. I just want my damn parking spot back, and I want Thompson to pay for what he's been doing. Little did I know, Thompson wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, I woke up to a violation notice taped to my door. HOA violation, unauthorized use of common areas. Fine, $250. Immediate payment required. I stared at it in disbelief. What common area? I hadn't done anything. This was retaliation, plain and simple. Anger burned through me as I stormed back into my condo. If Thompson thought he could scare me off with a bogus fine, he had seriously underestimated me. I grabbed my phone and called Janet. He's trying to find me now, I said the moment she picked up. She sighed. I was afraid of this. Thompson does this to anyone who challenges him. Well, he picked the wrong person this time, I growled. I wasn't going to wait a week for fake financial reports. I needed to hit him where it hurt, his power over the HOA. If he wanted a fight, I was more than ready to give him one. I held the violation notice in my hands, my blood boiling. Thompson was retaliating, and I had no doubt this bogus fine was just the beginning. He wanted to intimidate me, to make me back off before I dug too deep. Big mistake. Instead of scaring me, he had just given me more ammunition. If he was willing to fabricate violations to silence me, that meant he was desperate enough to start making mistakes. I grabbed my phone and called Janet. He find you? She asked the moment she picked up. Yeah. Some nonsense about unauthorized use of common areas. He didn't even specify what I did. She let out a dry chuckle. Classic Thompson. That's his go-to move when someone challenges him. Well, I'm not paying a dime, I said. And I'm not dropping this. Good, Janet said. But if you want to take him down, you need real proof. The financial records he promised? He's never going to hand them over willingly. I already knew that. Thompson was stalling, buying time to cover his tracks. But I wasn't going to wait for him to play defense. I was going on the attack. I spent the next few hours reaching out to residents, especially those who had received suspicious fines in the past year. I started compiling a list: who was fined, for what reason, and how much they paid. The pattern was clear. The people who had challenged Thompson or spoken out against the HOA were the ones hit with the most bogus fines. Then I got a breakthrough. One resident, a woman named Maria, reached out after hearing what I was doing. "I have something you need to see," she said. "Can you meet me?" We met at a local coffee shop, where she slid a folder across the table. "I used to be the HOA's treasurer," she explained, "before Thompson pushed me out. I kept copies of certain, questionable transactions." I flipped open the folder, my heart pounding. Inside were records of checks written to HOA general funds, but instead of being deposited into the HOA's actual account, the money had been funneled into a private bank account under Thompson's name. "This is it," I breathed. "This is exactly what I need." Maria nodded. "He's been siphoning money for months. Probably longer. Fines, parking fees, he's pocketing all of it." This was more than an HOA dispute now. This was full-on fraud. I wasted no time. That evening, I gathered the residents who had been wronged, those fined unfairly, those whose parking spots had been stolen, and anyone else who had been mistreated by Thompson's corrupt leadership. We met in Lawson's garage, forming a plan. "We're going to expose him," I said, holding up Maria's documents. "We're going to make this public and force his hand." "How?" one resident asked. "First, we demand a special HOA meeting," I said. "One where he can't hide behind stalling tactics. If he refuses, we'll go public, social media, news outlets, whatever it takes." "And if that doesn't work?" Lawson asked. I smirked. "Then we go legal. Fraud is a serious crime." The group agreed. We sent an official petition to the board, demanding an emergency HOA meeting within 48 hours. To our surprise, Thompson agreed. He must have thought he could still spin the situation in his favor. 2 days later, the community clubhouse was packed. Residents filled every seat, whispering amongst themselves. People knew something big was about to go down. Thompson sat at the head of the table, looking irritated but composed. "Let's keep this meeting orderly," he said. "I understand there have been concerns about the HOA's finances." I cut him off. "Not concerns, Greg. Proof." The room went silent. I stepped forward and held up Maria's documents. "We have records of checks being deposited into a personal account under your name. Funds that were supposed to go to the HOA." Thompson's face went pale. "That's ridiculous." I turned to Maria. "You worked as the treasurer. Can you confirm these records?" Maria stood up. "I can. I saw them myself before I was forced out of my position." Murmurs spread through the crowd. People were catching on. Lawson stood up next. "And let's not forget the bogus fines. Everyone who's spoken out against the HOA has been hit with penalties. Coincidence?" A few residents nodded. Then Mrs. Patel stood up. "And the parking spots," she added. "How many other residents had their assigned spaces stolen and rented out?" More murmurs. Thompson was sweating now. "These accusations are baseless," he snapped. "If there were financial discrepancies, they were clerical errors at most." "Then prove it," I challenged. "Show us the real financial records." Thompson shifted in his seat. He knew he was trapped. Then, in a last-ditch effort, he turned it back on me. "This is a witch hunt," he said. "This man is just angry about his parking spot. He's trying to cause chaos in the community." I smirked. "If I'm wrong, then you won't mind an independent audit, right?" The room fell silent. Thompson hesitated. "An audit is unnecessary." "Sounds like you're hiding something," Lawson said. The pressure was mounting. More and more residents were starting to speak up, demanding transparency. Then someone spoke up from the back of the room. "I think we should vote." Everyone turned to see an older gentleman, one of the longest-standing members of the HOA board. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "A vote to remove Mr. Thompson from his position." For the first time, real fear flashed across Thompson's face. And just like that, the tide turned against him. A vote. The word echoed through the room, sending a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. People looked at each other, some nodding in agreement, others whispering anxiously. Greg Thompson's face was a mask of barely contained panic. He had walked into this meeting thinking he could talk his way out of everything. But now, the residents were turning on him. The older gentleman who had suggested the vote cleared his throat. As per HOA bylaws, if there is substantial concern regarding the conduct of a board member, the community has the right to call for an emergency vote of no confidence. I folded my arms. Let's do it then. Thompson slammed his hands on the table. This is ridiculous. You don't have the authority. Actually, we do, Janet interrupted, standing up. And if we get the majority, you're out. Thompson's eyes darted around the room, looking for allies, but most of the board members were silent. Some looked uncomfortable, while others seemed outright eager to distance themselves from him. They had seen the evidence. They knew he was guilty. Then, as if on cue, Maria stepped forward and placed a stack of papers on the table. Before the vote, I'd like to submit these financial documents to the community as evidence. These are the bank statements showing how our HOA fees and parking rental money were being deposited into Greg Thompson's personal account. A collective gasp filled the room. Is this true? Someone demanded. Thompson shook his head rapidly. No, this is a setup. This is all fabricated. Then let an independent auditor confirm that, I said. Unless, of course, you have something to hide. His lips pressed into a thin line. He knew he was trapped. The board members exchanged glances, and finally, the HOA's secretary, a quiet woman named Linda, spoke up. I believe a vote is necessary. One by one, hands started going up. First Lawson. Then Mrs. Patel. Then nearly every resident in the room. Even a few of the board members. In the end, the final count was overwhelming. By a clear majority, Linda announced, Greg Thompson is hereby removed as HOA president, effective immediately. A loud cheer erupted from the crowd. Thompson stood frozen, his face drained of all color. You can't do this, he muttered. I built this community. I made the rules. You stole from us, Janet cut in. And now you're paying the price. Security was called to escort him out. As he walked past me, he glared with pure hatred. You'll regret this, he hissed under his breath. I smirked. I doubt it. But the fallout wasn't over yet. Justice served cold. With Thompson gone, the HOA board had no choice but to conduct a full audit of the finances. And as expected, the corruption ran deeper than anyone realized. Tens of thousands of dollars were missing. Bogus fines, illegal parking rentals, misappropriated funds, it all led back to Thompson. It didn't take long for law enforcement to get involved. Within weeks, formal charges were filed against him for fraud and embezzlement. The best part? The BMW owner, the guy who had been paying Thompson for my spot, came forward with receipts proving that he had been making direct cash payments to Thompson for months. That sealed the case. A few months later, Thompson was found guilty. The judge ordered him to pay back everything he had stolen, plus hefty fines. Oh, and he also got prison time. The HOA, now under new leadership, overturned dozens of the bogus fines Thompson had issued. Residents who had been unfairly targeted finally got justice. And me? I got my parking spot back. The first day I parked in it again, I stood there for a moment, just soaking in the victory. It wasn't just about the spot anymore. It was about standing up to corruption and proving that no one, no matter how powerful they think they are, is above accountability. As I locked my car, Lawson walked up beside me. You really did it, he said with a chuckle. Took down the HOA president. I smirked. No one messes with my parking spot. He laughed. Well, if you ever want to run for HOA president yourself, you've got my vote. I shook my head. Nah. I think I've had enough HOA drama for a lifetime. With that, I walked into my home, knowing that, for the first time in a long time, I wouldn't have to fight my own community just to live in peace. At least, not until the next HOA scandal,